means that, I'll use like appearances as a good example here, right? So you take certain things for granted that are necessary, right? Like things that you desire, but it's sort of like the symptom versus the disease fallacy. And so what that means is, it basically means that you'll care about things that are necessary for you to cope with the specific contrived state that you're in. So a good example is bread and circuses, right? If you have your bread, you have welfare, or you have in the end of Rome, you have your food, you have your basic comforts, your entertainment. That's really what the individual cares about. So in that sense, the individual is selfish, or at least their ego supersedes logic and reason. So the human function cares more, the average mass person cares more about that. As long as those needs are met, they'll go along with anything. They'll go along with, war crimes, the Holocaust, like, not that they'll necessarily do it themselves, although to some extent, but like they'll turn a blind eye, right? Like right now, in any era of history, any country, anything, you'll turn a blind eye to certain things, or you'll even enable and facilitate them if you benefit from them. Hey, how's it going? Right, so that's the point, is like, it doesn't matter what standards you have or don't have. It's like people are willing to look the other way if they benefit from it, or if they have their needs met, they have their relative comforts, right? So in that sense, the mass people generally in any society are not very credible. So again, the bread and circuses example is pretty well known, pretty obvious. Like, it doesn't matter at a certain point. That's the problem. It's not that like, oh, you disagree with their standard that they have of a mass of people. It's that they don't have a standard at all, right? They'll go along with anything if a few criteria are met. So one of the criteria, again, is do you have enough to hang on a second, this turn is like ridiculous. Alright, so the point is that, do you have your basic needs met? Do you have your food? You have your comforts? Like in the modern day, you have your entertainment, you have your television, you have whatever. So now it doesn't matter to the person as much whether their life or their society is based in logic and reason or anything, or any consistent measure or standard that they have, right? So they'll look the other way. It's almost like a Faustian, bribery system, right? Again, welfare is a very obvious, direct one. They'll give the peasants welfare so that they don't revolt. Otherwise, they would, right? So it's not. So does then giving them welfare mean that, the state that they're living in they agree with, or is rational, or the society around them makes sense or has logic to it? No, it doesn't mean that. It means that they have their welfare, so they're happy with that, and they'll sit by and they'll be content, right, with the food they have, the entertainment they have, stuff like that. So it doesn't answer the core question or validate it, because by that logic, the same thing could be true of any society. That, again, in World War II Germany, if they give you welfare, or China gives you welfare now, or whatever society, right? That doesn't mean that you agree with it, even by your own subjective standard, or that doesn't mean that it's validated by some other empirical basis, right? So that's the way it kind of is subverted. The other way that I was talking about is with appearances. Like, why do appearances matter, and why do people care about them? And it tells you basically the initial versus the larger process fallacy that I talk about. The same reality could be present in both scenarios, but what the initial minded person would be bothered by is, well, it's just not dressed up well enough. It just looks off. It just looks bad, right? So either way, the underlying process is the same, but again, people are kind of stupid, to put it simply, that, we care if it's presented properly, and then we'll ignore what's out of sight, out of mind, behind closed doors, versus either way, you're concerned with the nature of the process. And in fact, it kind of indicates the opposite. What I call the opposite interpretation effect is like, the fact that something needs to be dressed up and the appearances do matter shows you that there must be something to hide underneath, or effectively it's the same thing as anything else. But that's why. So what I call the contest of contrivance, basically, like society, when you concede to a monopolized basis and everything is like, given up, you basically concede control of everything in society. Now it comes down to who can put up appearances best, right? This is what happens in like the corporate world. I think Steve Jobs said something sort of that ties into this. He says like, it becomes about the branding. You already have the products, you already have the monopoly, the market share. So now it's like, okay, who can dress up their product the best? Who can do the best ads and do something funny and stupid and viral? And like, so what the mass of society is doing then, I don't know what this is about, but I can't hear the gate lisp. I don't know what that means, but like, again, you concede kind of everyone like that these are your corporate rulers of the world, these are the these are the predominant products and companies and corporations. So now it becomes, you already accept that, right? So now it becomes a competition of who can put the best marketing, the best ads, the best, the best cashier. Like the cashier was nice to me, so that justifies the unqualified monopolization over nature itself by these big corporations and stuff. Like, that's what it comes down to in a non-value subversive state. So that's what the mass of people will go along with kind of mindlessly. Like, okay, their needs are met, so they'll go along with it, even though there's no real basis to it in the origin point. Right, or the origin point was something you would disagree with them, right? Like, it's arbitrary or it's just by force. Like, okay, this wouldn't exist unless a bunch of people had come and killed other people and taken something by force, right? That's kind of common sense, and that doesn't mean it's bad necessarily, because you can say that about a lot of things, but you could say that about, but the same could be done any other way. So like, if the same thing happened now in front of you, a bunch of people come over, invaders, and kill everyone around you, you wouldn't be too happy with that. You would say, we reject this on a moral basis, but you're only living in the state that you are now because the same thing happened. So it's kind of like, right, it's ex post facto justification, do what I say, not what I do, those kind of fallacies. And so again, the concept being that the mass of people will turn a blind eye to anything if their needs are met, if the appearances are adequate. So like, let's stay on the appearances topic for a second, because that one's kind of very telling. Pretend you live in a society like a commune that's like a nudist colony. People are at peace with their own natural self and naked body and stuff like that. I've used that example before. What happens is they would face reality directly, so they'd be more at peace with themselves. And again, it ties into a minimalistic kind of lifestyle where everything is kind of direct and honest, right? Whereas in society with so many people and technology and things like that, overextension, everything is like at a distance, where it's kind of like we pretend to value people or certain things socially, but in reality we don't. Like it, the reality is revealed either way, right? So it's like, we care about other people and human beings, and we'll have that as a pretense of what we value, but then we'll ultimately we will gravitate towards big corporations rather than mom and pop local stores. So the Walmarts, etc., rule the world. So it shows you we don't really value people as much as we pretend to, because for a little extra convenience or selection or prices or whatever, we'll buy into that and build up those companies. Or the flip side is, I said the same thing with like what's happening with AI, or not even AI, but like the self-checkout. You'll use self-checkout, and in turn that'll cost somebody their job, but because of the minor convenience or laziness or whatever it is, you'll go along with that. So it's kind of like, what is the reality of what you actually value versus the observable practice of what you do, right? Compared to what you pretend to value. And similar to that is kind of like the way that people are valued socially is kind of a fallacy that like, look at this nice old lady, she's a cashier, you're nice to her, you feel bad for her, whatever, like, but meanwhile you're doing it in service of an unqualified empirical state that you might disagree with. So it's kind of like, that's almost like the corporation hiding behind them. It's similar to the fallacy of tipping, like, you have to tip somebody and you feel bad for the waitress and this and that, but why don't you hold accountable the bosses, people hiring them, right, in the restaurant, etc., because if they just paid them a decent amount, then you wouldn't need to tip them. So you're letting them get away with something that other businesses can't get away with by letting them underpay people, and then you make up for it with tips, which you can't do in other businesses. You would just go out of business if you couldn't pay them a proper wage, right? So that's the kind of fallacy where this sort of humanistic, pseudo-humanistic thing comes in of like, it's not a real basis, because it could be used to then reinforce anything, right? And people do that on an individual, personal basis too. Like, oh, we sympathize with the struggles of other people and, ordinary everyday life. Otherwise, like, oh, you're out of touch. But the problem with that is it would reinforce anything then, including things that are set in place methodically by the very power structure I'm talking about. Like, the reason why you're struggling the way you are, while we can sympathize on a basic level, is because it's set in place that you should struggle that way, that you're made to struggle that way on purpose. That way you can't, challenge or be free of the current power structure. So it's kind of like, by reinforcing that struggle too much and taking pride in it and gratification from dealing with it or whatever, you're actually reinforcing, you're doing it in service of that unqualified power structure state, right? It would be different if you're like living in nature. It's like, oh, we got to band together and fight this bear and try to struggle, whatever we do. But when it's something man-made, it's like, it's not an accident, right? Your struggle, your state of life, etc., is not an accident. It's set in place very methodically by government, corporations, etc., over a long period of time to make you kind of reliant on them. So it's not an accident. So now when you say, oh, we take pride in this, dealing with this, or we kind of sympathize with one another dealing with this, it actually inadvertently or directly helps to reinforce that power structure. So it's kind of a question there. And the other flip side of that is, let me think, whatever, let me just take a second. But yeah, that was a good topic. Like, again, appearances. Why do you need appearances? It shows you're a controlled, mindless slave, basically, that you can't face reality directly, so you have to hide behind appearances. And so the enemy is anyone who breaks the illusion of the false absolute state that you're in. Not that it isn't absolute, right? So what is really the issue? It basically is a concession that you would have issue with the exact same state and lifestyle and society and reality that you're in. You would have an issue with it by your own standard, evidently, if it wasn't for the appearances that cover it up and make it seem like something that it isn't, right? If you saw like the full, larger process. That's what the absolutists would do in difference, though, is like, that is different. They would see the nature of the process anyway, because they would think objectively and observe and kind of analyze, like kind of what I'm doing right now. But like, you would be aware of the nature of the process, which anyone can do anyway, regardless of the appearances, which might seem hard to do. The stigma effect kind of helps with that I've talked about. But that's what I mean, is like, it's kind of hard to explain. Just, I wasn't even planning on doing this, but something messed up in my car, so now I have to go all the way back to somewhere I didn't want to be. Basically, story time. And then I'll address something this guy said that made me think of something here too. But these little cigarette lighter things in my car, I keep charging like my phones and my laptop and stuff with that. It blew out both over a long period of time, but it blew out both of them, so I don't know why that is. So what happens is that, like, let me look at it this way. Okay, people will be happy with and overcompensate with the controlled state that they're in, but it's not about that, right? That's what the absolutist objective basis would do. It doesn't matter how comfortable you are, how much you get bribed by those relative comforts or whatever, right? It's about the objective, consistent measure and logic of it, right? Is there any basis to control empirically your life or a lot of things that you do, right? And it sort of turns into a guilty until proven innocent fallacy that society operates under, is like, you need permission to do everything, right? And so it's a situation where people will go along, again, with anything if they just, you create like a false flag fallacy, like, oh, one person does something bad and now that's used to fearmonger and restrict everybody, right? That's kind of the premise, that how did I say it? You let the evil of one person enslave everybody. So that turns into the real evil, is that, like, when you use the actions of a few to restrict many, right? That's the authoritarian principle, but people go along with that, right? You're happily restricted because you believe, oh, it makes you safe or something like that. And then but yeah, the idea that people will focus on what is presented to them in terms of they'll focus on all the things that don't matter, right? The appearance, the kind of things that people didn't even choose, like race or gender, or just things that don't really matter that much, right? And they'll ignore the larger process. So you always get trapped by that. You might think that's something you enjoy or find interesting, or is valuable to you. It's certainly easy. It kind of doesn't require much thought, so you go with that. But that's what, again, you would rather be objectively like uncertain and aware of the larger process than defined by those things, like just because they don't require thought. Right. It's easy, but it's also not even very accurate or credible. So it's kind of like, you put yourself in a position to be controlled by it because you get controlled by the surface level. And despite all our technology and collective knowledge and achievement, we don't seem to understand that very well. Right, like the individual will still go for these very basic, superficial social things. But that's the thing you have to be wary of with social contrivance in general. It's kind of like, it would reinforce anything. So, like, be nice to other people. So if you were raised in a tribe in the jungle, you got to be nice to everybody around you, and you'll go along with that lifestyle. If you were raised in World War II Germany, you got to be nice and reinforce that. So at what point do you have a standard? You're kind of neutral and objective. It'll be framed as negative because it requires, the contrived state you're in requires constant reinforcement, overcompensation, right? So it shows you it's not only not a standard, it's arbitrary because it's just reinforcing whatever is in front of you, right? And so that works especially well in the service of unqualified empirical authority because it does, let me lay out the process from the origin point. A bunch of people, okay, let me do it very simply. Like, country A invades country B and kills everybody there and takes over their land and monopolizes it and, takes over everything. And then people living in that society now, have some freedom over everything, the resources around them, but over time they keep losing that freedom and corporations take over, government takes over. So now you end up in a state like what we're in now, which again is unqualified in the origin point also, but now what do? They put up these props and these labels, like these namesakes and these people as figureheads, and it's kind of like, just right. So again, it becomes about the contest of contrivance, who can put up the best appearances to overcompensate for the fact that none of this authority is ultimately qualified or whatever, right? And so it's a situation where it's a situation where there's no real basis. Again, the origin point would be something you disagree with, like, oh, that's done through force, through violence, something you would condemn now. But because it's already been done, you'll go along with the results of it, right? There's never a reversal, there's never a neutrality. And again, the real point of that isn't to say, oh, it's bad and you shouldn't go along with it or benefit from it. Like the way that people sometimes say, like with reparations or something. It's not about that. It's about, is it absolute? Is it something that is valid to be, forced on you and define your life and your children and stuff like that? Or is it just, oh, it just happened incidentally and now you'll go along with it as though it's absolute, which is the whole point of indoctrination. It's kind of like the myopic framing of something. So that's the real point. You would observe the stigma effect and like the faults of something, not to specifically invalidate it and say, oh, this is bad and you should do something else. That's the false duality fallacy we often see. No, it's instead that it's not absolute, it's exclusive to everything else. So it's kind of the opposite, right? You're not saying this specific thing is bad and you should do some specific thing else instead. You're observing that this specific thing that's forced on you as though it's absolute and the only thing and the only way of life is arbitrary. Its origin point you would disagree with, how it came to be, again, by force, etc. And then, you know, the makeup of it, etc. It's not absolute, so that there's no basis to outwardly insist it upon everybody else as though it is absolute. And so that's the unfortunate thing, is that people associate their identity with that contrived state, which they didn't choose, which they would disagree with the origin point of, which, again, origin point is arbitrary, by force, etc. It's not really based on anything, it's just reactionary. And so now you insist upon and reinforce it, but that would imply that if something else was done by force, and it kind of is in a way, you would go along with that too. So it's just, it's not really a very credible basis, and so I don't know. This isn't the way I came at all, so I don't know why it took me back this way. I came on like more of a highway, and now it's taking me on some local road, which isn't too bad even, but I'm a little annoyed because I keep like getting my car in what seems like a perfect shape. That seems like, okay, now I have to go and do things, but then it keeps, I don't know, like charging laptop and stuff in the car causes those cigarette lighter things to mess up. Yeah, that's a good basis. Well, what else was I saying? The fact that you basically put yourself in a position where you'll go along kind of with anything if you reinforce it, especially it's kind of the inherent value versus the reactive value. So do you value inherent objective reality and truth, or do you value the reactive kind of what you need to believe or need to do or need to think to cope with the contrivance state that you're already in, which again would have some value, but the fact that it's set in motion by people doesn't really garner much sympathy then, because it's like, well, then you go along with anything, and so therefore you have no credibility, and so everything you do is just reactive. So if you were put in a different reactive state, you would go along with that. So it's kind of like a first basis value, just, you know, whatever's forced on you first is right, and then if something else is forced on somebody, that would be right, which would certainly explain a lot of human history. But it's kind of the way that specifics and possessions and anything like that actually ends up restricting you, because it limits you to one thing as opposed to everything else. And it kind of explains too, like, you know, the fallacy of inability. It's like you're assuming what somebody wants and the will, or you're even defining them by the half measure or some functionalism, right? There's no, again, interest in objective inherent truth, or there's no interest in even like a true value standard basis. Like, so do you value people inherently, like amalgam theory, or do you value people in their inherent natural state and their potential, or do you value a reactive indoctrinated basis they're reduced to, you know, a reactionary state, which again, the point with that is the premise would be conditional. It's like, well, in order to cope with the current society that we're subject to, we'll put up with these things, or we'll go along with this for now until we can finally be free and remove the need, or you know, the same thing would be true of basically even like a functional basis. Like, so you always could ask that question. We're doing the empirical authority, whether it be like a parent or something else saying it. We're doing this for this end, the zero-sum end. So that's why absolutists, even when they're young or the objective basis could present, it would reject those things because, again, like things that seem positive, like a birthday or some gifts or something, they would reject that because it's like, oh, that's just to reinforce and overcompensate for this unqualified empirical restrictive state that isn't justified in the first place. So it's a question of adequate overcompensation that would make you tolerate something that's otherwise unqualified. It's not about, were your overcompensations good or not good enough. It's about, was the state and the basis of restricting you in the first place qualified or not, and it's not. So it's kind of a cruel, twisted thing because we're going to train people like animals and restrict them in a way that has no actual basis to do. And then it comes down to, can we overcompensate adequately enough or not? So there's, again, the individual. Like I always say, you can tolerate anything, but should you do it in service of a specific contrivance state, something that's unqualified, that doesn't make sense? There's no actual logical basis to it. So it seems to have value in a reactive sense, but pretend, again, objectively, you have all this technology, you have all this collective human achievement. At some point, it's not just about you, it's about the inherent objective basis. Like, forget about you then. Okay, you can starve out, you can die, but was it a sound logical basis in existence, or was it just reactionary? Did it have adequate overcompensations that you don't question it and you go along with it? Or even like the pretense of functionalism there would be like, okay, that would be like, okay, you have to do this for this end. Like, you train and condition people almost like animals. But what if you don't want that specific thing? For example, then you say, okay, then I don't need, like, the two ways I could show this, and especially in a youthful kind of sense, right? So a child growing up, objectively observing the world, is like those three criterias, right? They would seem like, they're always neutral, and even at their birthday party or gifts or whatever, they're always like, they're sulking, they're being negative, they're being ungrateful, they're being entitled. But it's like they don't really want those things that are in a way kind of pressured and forced on them, including social interaction is the same way. They don't want those things, or they treat those things neutrally and reject them because they know there's just an overcompensation or an unqualified state that they didn't choose and that it has no real basis to it. So you take away those things and now you realize, okay, well, any day could be that day, or every day could be that day, or no day could be that day, like the special tradition, permission, holiday. So it's not about that. It's like, it's an imbalance overcompensation for something that's self-created, and it doesn't need to be done and has no basis to being done. And so that means that, right, it seems positive, but it's an overcompensation for an unqualified state. Again, not an unqualified state like, that means you're selfish and you just want something, and you don't want anything. You want less then, but you want it to be consistent, because what it means is, right, like you're rejecting what seems like it's using it as like a bribery system, like a machination process, zero-sum means, overcompensation, distraction. Those are just things that try to overcompensate for an unqualified state. So you would rather have less. You would rather, okay, I'll eat one meal a day and I'll sleep on the ground and I'll live in the woods. But at least that's a rational basis, and you could be free in that, instead of, no, it's overextended but overcompensated for. So never qualified, right? Unqualified basis. The other two examples I could give. So again, picture that imagery, like, you're sulking at a birthday party, your own birthday party, but it's neutral and no overcompensation and no special propaganda value on human beings just for human sake because we're humans, right? Special value, no standard behind it. But the other two are the pretense of functionalism would be like, you have to do this for this. So then the objective basis would look at one of two things. Well, how could we do this, whatever the functional basis is, right? You have to do this for that reason, right? For this end. And And the reason why is because you have to do this functional base, like you have to behave or you have to act in this way, or you have to do this, functional thing for this outcome, right? So you would question one of two things in that. You wouldn't say, okay, let me just do it then. You would say, how can I do it so efficiently or so well that I can now remove the need for ever having to do it again, right? So you would just let me do it as efficiently as possible, then get it over with, right? Instead of insisting upon it like I'm going to be controlled by it. No, I'm not like that's the parents or the society's intent to control you. Like, oh, you have to do it in this exact way for this reason. But then you don't take that to mean what they want it to. Like, okay, so now I'll do what you say. No, I won't do what you say. I'll do it so if in your authority and right, that's the absolutist, like do it so efficiently that you remove the need or invalidate any authority. You're doing the process for the process's sake instead of people try to take ownership over that. Or if you do it too much, too well, now that's condemned too because now they can't control it. And the flip, so you would try to do it so efficiently as to remove the need. Or the second part of it is you would be the minimalist approach that you have to do this for that. You say, well, do I really need that? Maybe I don't want that, so I'll do without that so that I no longer have to do this, right? So the minimalist would do that. So the absolutist would do it so efficiently that it removes any sort of authority basis of it. It's just a zero-sum process. You try to do it more efficiently to remove the need. Or the minimalist would do it the other way of like, well, I don't really need that. I'll do without it. So now I don't have to do that thing in the first place. Now there's no basic control or authority. I'll just deal without it, right? Do with as little as possible. So those are the two scenarios you can look at in that sense. And then the flip side is I don't know. Yeah, these have been a couple good discussions back to back when I'm not going in with much look at the name of that road. That could be a whole meme in itself. I don't think it means quite what people would associate with meaning, but yeah, I don't know what kind of weird road we ended up back on. This is definitely not the way I came, which you could even see that maybe for your. So speaking of minimalism, like even this farmland, it gets somewhat gentrified, but this could be, vehicles are the one contrast. Oh, you're living on a nice little farm, but you still have like these modern trucks and vehicles and, seeding to technology. So what defines human life is kind of like that, where you think you have standards, you think you have this, but technology always wins, right? So that's the real Darwinism of technology versus all this pretense social contrivance. Like, we value people, but does that stop you from using technology that ravages not so much the environment, but like that comes from third world countries are only third world countries because of the technology that you have to make yours a first world country, right? It's not something you want to really think about, but you treat it as a default, but it's not a default, right? You act like I don't know. It's an uncomfortable truth, but it's kind of like if you really cared about other people, you wouldn't be doing that. And so, what if everybody was a minimalist? Then there'd be plenty for everybody, and first of all, there wouldn't be so many people in the first place because you wouldn't be preserving the stimuli acme so flippantly, right? But it's just kind of it's a zero-sum process, but it's one that doesn't ask itself what the measure or the purpose or intention behind it really is. And it also is kind of ravenous in that way. You'll be eating 3 meals a day and enjoying your luxuries, which has no basis to it, just self-interest, gratification, whatever. But meanwhile, other people starve. Like there is no real basis to it, and then you'll feel gratified for something else through some overextension, exuberance, excesses. But it really has no basis to it. And so it's a situation where, it's a difficult topic. Like, that's why I say objectivity is not useful. And not only is it not useful, it's actually uncomfortable. And not only is it uncomfortable, but it's actually also, it also puts you in a position to, just be controlled in a certain way that, how can I explain it? Like, it's not as simple as people are victims of contrivance, and they are. I always use that expression specifically, that they're victims of contrivance, but they're also complicit with it, because the way that you're controlled is like the way that you're controlled is in this manner that it's kind of like, you ultimately get something out of it. So it's like you'll turn a blind eye to that rejection of amalgam theory and true value of everybody everywhere in a minimalistic, neutral equivalency state, so that you can, it's the difference between preserving the stimuli acme and doing amalgam theory. It's like kind of like, you would never have children, you would adopt ones who are already in need, right, if you truly cared about human life, which of course people don't at all. But the point being that it's just used as a pretense of something else. But what it means is that you would live a life of exuberance that way, and that allows you to live a life of exuberance, and that allows you to do something else, because how can you claim to have a standard or basic value? So it's not about shaming you, like, oh, you should do something else. No, you can do whatever you want, but then the credibility has to be held accountable. Like, okay, you're eating 3 meals a day and engaging in luxuries and things you don't really need, while other people are starving, so you clearly don't value human life. So don't pretend to then justify the pretense of gratification of control that you have. Like, so you have no credibility. You're just practicing the non-base of self. That's fine, but now you have no basis to tell anybody else what to do or anything like that. And so right, that's why pretenses are used, like whether it be, oh, you value other people or something like that. It'll be used in a selective, myopic, inconsistent, way to justify a specific thing, in reinforcement of a specific contrivance state, in reinforcement of something, myopic like that. And so, right, that would account for every era of history. So I call it like everything false absolute. Like, everybody has their own false absolute. So your way of life is absolute, but everybody else who's living in different ways around the world, other countries, other time periods, their way of life is also absolute. And if you question it and creates cognitive dissonance, you might say, well, but that hinders productivity. But it's productivity towards the same zero-sum purpose that you're assuming, right? Instead of having a thought of your own, like, maybe that thing or that end goal isn't worth doing in the first place, or you would rather do something else. Right, the collective mass has to be controlled in a certain way like that, but